Because trying not to think is very hard. Would everybody agree? Have you ever tried not to think? Does it work?
No.
Thank you. So trying not to think doesn't work.
It's like trying not to breathe.
Almost.
Almost, yes. When I don't breathe, I don't think. But I cannot remain a long time. But it's very much connected.
No, but what he's saying is serious, because that's why in India they do a lot of breathing exercises, because the slowing down of the breath slows down the mind. So there's some easier ways that can help us to approach that state of consciousness, and one has to do with thinking about. Do you understand the word contemplation? Yes. But contemplation is an important word, because contemplation means we're trying to use the mind in a way that's constructive and positive. Yeah. It's different than just mindless thinking. So contemplation is is directed cognition or directed thought. So we're trying to use the mind in a way that's very constructive in order to help facilitate our own freedom. So, in the context of what we're talking about, if we spend time contemplating the nature of zero, that can be incredibly helpful. So what it means is, conjuring the idea or the image or the meaning of zero, which is the meaning of nothing. The zero means empty of content. It means no thing whatsoever. And if we can conjure up the meaning of zero in our minds, the feeling of nothing will begin to, sooner or later, will begin to arise, because nothing feels like something. And what we'll find is, if we stay with this, that it's better you don't take notes. And I'll tell you the reason why, because when we take notes, we're intending to forget. I mean, if you want to take notes, you can, but it's better just to be open. And I think what's helpful you'll remember, and what's not but it's better just to be present. So if we contemplate the nature of zero, and we just stay with it gently, and if the mind moves away, we just gently bring it back. It's not a problem, because the mind will start to want to bring it back to zero. And then we'll find that when you begin to just focus on the nature of zero and try and feel into its meaning, because zero is a symbol. It's a symbol that represents nothing. And nothing, when we concentrate on it, begins to feel like something. And if we stay with the contemplation of zero, we'll notice that it feels like freedom. And the feeling of freedom feels good, feels free. So spending some time, 20 minutes, 30 minutes, just sitting very quietly and without a lot of stress or pressure or force, but very easily and in a very relaxed manner, contemplating the nature of zero, you'll start to feel it. You'll start to feel zero means nothing, nothingness, no thingness, emptiness, voidness. And then as you stay with it, the feeling of emptiness or the feeling of voidness will start to calm you down. You'll start to feel very calm, and the mind will start to slow down, simply because you're contemplating the nature of nothing whatsoever. And then, when that happens, you'll find yourself in a natural, effortless, spontaneous, very easy state of meditation. And it's a state of meditation in which you won't be trying to meditate, because when people are trying to meditate, they're trying to control their mind, they're trying to sit right and breathe right and trying to do it right. So when you're trying to do it right, we usually get it wrong. We might look good from the outside, but inside we're just full of tension and confusion, frustration. For a lot of people, meditation is an experience of frustration more than anything else. But if we can find access to our own consciousness, which is what I'm talking to you about, if we can find access to our own consciousness, and I've been thinking about this a little bit every day, what Eckhart Tolle is pointing all of us to in that book is the nature of our own consciousness already. So is your consciousness... Good morning, namaste, hello, how are you, welcome. If everybody had to pay 100 rupees for each 10 minutes late, it would come on time. Hi. Now you get to find out about the guy you were reading about. So I have a question for you on this subject. Is your own consciousness far away from you?
My own consciousness?
Yeah. Yeah.
Far away from me?
Yeah.
No, I wouldn't say so.
Is it near?
I would say it's within. So yeah, it's near.
How close is it?
I mean, it depends.
Does it, maybe it depends, maybe it doesn't depend. But looking into the nature of your experience in this moment, is your consciousness, your experience of consciousness. Now, I'm not talking to you about the content of consciousness, because the content of consciousness are thoughts, memories, ideas, opinions, beliefs, feelings. I'm not talking about the content of consciousness, but I'm talking about consciousness as a felt presence, as a feeling. Is consciousness near or is it distant?
Well, it's here right now.
Very good. So and when it's here, how close is it to you?
It is the real you, I guess. So it's...
No, but speak. You're giving the right answer. You're giving the right answer. But are you speaking from from your direct experience of it, or for what you think about it?
I'd say from experience.
So right now in this moment, do you feel that your consciousness is the most intimate part of who you are in this moment?
I'd say the deepest.
Do you feel it?
I feel it. Yeah.
What does it feel like?
I mean, you're talking like imaginatively, I'd be like, it's soft.
No, that's good. We're doing good. So it's soft, and that's very good. It's soft. And soft means, would you say peaceful?
Yes.
And in your experience of consciousness, is it located in any particular place?
I mean, for myself, it's kind of a balance between the brain and the gut.
Yeah, but what I want you to do is feel into the experience of consciousness that you're having in this moment, because we're all having the same experience. And so I'm asking you a simple question: is consciousness located in a particular place? Is it located between your eyebrows, the top of your head, the middle of your chest, the bottom of your spine, and your knees and your feet? Is it located in any particular place, or is it located nowhere particularly?
Perhaps the temple.
Do you feel do you feel the presence of consciousness more intensely in your temple than you do in your toe?
No.
Good. So what you're discovering is that consciousness isn't located anywhere particularly, right? So consciousness is not located in any particular place. So is it everywhere in your experience?
Yeah.
Very good. So it's everywhere and nowhere, right? So is that which is in this moment, is that which is everywhere and nowhere? Does consciousness, the softness, that's the nature of consciousness, does it feel like you, or does it feel separate from you?
I would say it's the real me.
So it feels authentically you.
Yeah, everything else is just extra stuff.
Very good. Very good. So the state of awakened awareness that Eckhart Tolle is speaking about in The Power of Now is simply the awareness of the softness, the openness, the unobstructedness, and the freedom, the inherent freedom the inherent unlimited freedom of consciousness itself. So in your experience of consciousness in this moment, in that softness, is there fear?
Is there fear?
In consciousness?
No.
Is there desire?
No.
Is there joy?
Yes.
That's what that's exactly what he's pointing to. That's the place he's speaking from. That's what he's pointing to. So what I'm trying to help you with is that rather than trying not to think so much, or trying to constantly bring ourselves back to the present moment, which is one approach. It's called be here. And you've heard a lot of people speak about be here now. The be here now approach. Another way we can approach the same goal is by simply, gently, softly, but deliberately bring our attention back to our own experience of consciousness now. And it's not hard. It's actually very easy. We don't have to tie ourselves up in knots. And when we learn how to do this, and it's very easy because you're doing it right now yourself, it's always just like falling back into where we always already are. And that's exactly the state of consciousness that Eckhart's pointing us all to. It's not far away. It's right here. This is what Ramana was speaking about also. It's exactly the same thing. You feel it? Because you look a little bit more. You look a little calmer and a little bit more awake than you were 10 minutes ago. So imagine the feeling of what this is like is a metaphor I like to use is imagine that you're in a small little wooden boat out in the middle of the ocean. So we can, if we're in the boat by ourselves, the ocean, we can read the power of now, or I am that, or read about the teachings of Ramana, and we can hear about the ocean, which is consciousness, which is the ocean of being. Eckhart speaks a lot about being or isness. So if we're in the boat, we see the ocean and we understand that is being, but we're seeing being from outside of it. And being is an idea rather than a direct experience. And what's crazy about it is, as you clearly described when you were speaking about your own experience, the being or the consciousness is you already. You that's what you said. So when being or consciousness is who we already are, but our relationship to it is if it's not ourself, it's a form of madness. Because then we're looking at the ocean, if we're in that boat, we're looking at the ocean from a position that we see as being outside it. Even we could never be outside it, because without consciousness we don't exist. Without consciousness, the universe doesn't exist. So this is why the state of what we could call unenlightenment is simply the awareness of consciousness as the primary ground of all experience, the primary ground of being, the primary ground of all experience. So those enlightenment is simply becoming aware that consciousness is the ground of all experience. In congruence with the recognition that consciousness is the I, consciousness is me, consciousness is you. It's not the ego. It's not your personal identity, but it's you. Because as Ramana Maharshi points out so beautifully, the I is always there, but we have been, because of ignorance or because of lack of knowledge, we misappropriate the I to the small self, or to the ego self, or to our historical personality. But when you begin to pay attention, you begin to see that the I exists even when the historical personality is absent. Right? Good. Namaste. Hello. Good morning. Nice to see you again. So a nice way to think about it is I know I'm talking to you, but I'm actually talking to everybody. So a nice way to think about it is resting in being. So in terms of the metaphor I was just using, imagine you're sitting in a small boat floating on the ocean, and you simply stand up and slip into the water. So when you slip into the water, does it take effort to slip into the water? It doesn't take any effort. So we've slipped into the water, and then there's no gap between the reality of the infinite nature of consciousness or being and our own experience. So it's actually simply a matter of just of waking up to this truth in a way that's very gentle. And then when we do, as is what's happening to you right now, we fall into a state of meditation easily. And for that to happen, we don't have to do any particular technique. We don't have to do breathing exercises or focus our attention on any particular point. We just slip into the ocean and we're there. And once we get there, we will feel naturally compelled to want to stay there because it feels so good, it feels so free. Because it's a place where there's no birth and there's no death. And the reason for that is that, as I've explained in the last couple of days, being exists before time. So before the universe existed, as you probably have read about, before the universe came into being, there was indescribable voidness or nothingness or emptiness. Have you heard about that? Before there was something, there was nothing. And this nothingness is a place where there's no time, and there's no space, and there's no mind, there's no birth, and there's no death. The Buddha called this place the deathless, the unborn, and the uncreated. Deathless because there's no death there, and birthless, uncreated because there's no birth. So before the universe was created, there was nothing whatsoever, right? Exactly, the unmanifest. So before the universe was created, there was nothing whatsoever. So in nothingness, that voidness, Buddhists talk about it as emptiness. They call it emptiness or nothingness or voidness. But this emptiness or this nothingness or the voidness, Eckhart Tolle calls the ground of being. So the ground of being, or this emptiness, always exists or always abides before time. But it didn't exist before the universe was created only. It exists before time right now. Because linear time is passing, and the body and the mind and the personality exist in linear time. But deeper than linear time, there's a timeless, and there's timelessness and formlessness that exists. It doesn't not exist. Or we could say, to use metaphysical language, beyond existence and non-existence, there's only that. But to be more simple about it, prior to time exists no time. And this space that I'm pointing you to, which we're calling consciousness, is synonymous with that realm or that space that the Buddha called the unborn and the uncreated. So when the Buddha discovered nirvana in his meditation, this is exactly what he discovered. He discovered a place beyond birth and beyond death where there's no time and there's only freedom. So what's miraculous, and this is what I was speaking about also yesterday, is that we embodied human beings have this miraculous capacity to be able to awaken to and become conscious of this depth dimension that exists before time. We can do it right now. And the awakening to that depth dimension, to becoming conscious of consciousness, awakening to that depth dimension is what enlightenment is all about. And when you understand it, it becomes very easy, very natural, very effortless, and very obvious. But if we haven't discovered it, We can read a lot of books about it, and we can do all kinds of practices for a long periods of time and still not find it, because we're looking for this place from the perspective of our minds, but the mind can't find its own source. The mind can't find its own source. But when we let go of the mind, the source is all there is. And it feels very easy and very natural, and it is. And the point is this, what I'd like you to imagine is the feeling of being, which is what you're feeling now, the feeling of being, which is so peaceful. If you want to imagine what someone like Ramana Maharshi was experiencing, all you have to do is feel into the feeling of being you're having right now, and amplify with your mind and imagination. Imagine what it would be like if the feeling of being that you're experiencing right now was experienced with 100 times more intensity or fullness, or 1,000 times more intensity or fullness, or 100,000 times more intensity or fullness. If the feeling of being that you're experiencing now became more intense, your identification with your bodily existence, your physical existence, would begin to diminish, and your mind would be moving farther and farther and farther away. Of course. Thank you. Sorry. Good morning. I met you last year at John's, right? John David's? Yes. Nice to see you. Thank you. Welcome. So can you follow what I'm saying? Then if that, good morning, madam. Hello. Can you imagine if this gentle feeling were to increase, the feeling of being in a body would start fading away, and the mind, as a process of thought, or one thought arising after another, would diminish to a point of completely disappearing, and then sooner or later all there would be the feeling of being, and the whole world would disappear. Is that a tangible idea right now? So that's what the deepest states of kind of yogic attainment are really all about. It's nothing more than that. But what makes it so extraordinary is that in the feeling of being, as you will discover, is the presence of eternity. As you awaken to the feeling of being and you begin to pay attention. Sorry, am I speaking loud enough? No, sorry. So in the feeling of being is the presence of eternity. And eternity is the knowledge of this timelessness, reality where there's no birth and there's no death. And that place where there's no birth and there's no death is the source of immortality. And that's actually true. So this doesn't mean that your body is immortal or your mind's immortal or that your personality is, but the source of consciousness is. And when you experience that in a way that's very profound and convincing, at the level of the soul, something begins to change inside you. A shift of identity begins to happen, and you begin to identify more with this immortal self that exists at the source of consciousness, more than you do with the self that was born in a particular place in time, and with your human personality. And your body, your mind, and your personality will continue to exist, but then you become aware and experientially convinced that this is only part of who you are. It's not the deepest and most profound and essential part of who you are. That who you really are has never been born, and never entered the stream of time, and therefore is always free from anything and everything that ever happens in time. And the access to that knowledge is simply by becoming aware of the feeling of being and staying with it. And then, like as in the metaphor with the boat on the ocean, is simply allowing oneself to slip into that ocean. And as you do, not trying to make anything happen, but allowing yourself to sink ever more deeply from a place of deep surrender and awakened awareness. That's really all there is to it. That was the answer to your question yesterday, right? What?
Says that all the time.
Yeah, good. Wow, the vibe here today is so different than yesterday. Oh my God, it was so heavy yesterday. I came up with a term yesterday. I came up with an interesting idea. Because you know what people teach here in Tiruvannamalai is neo-Advaita, the new Advaita, neo-Advaita. So I came up with an interesting phrase called neo-nihilism. Unless somebody's laughing. It's neo-nihilism. Are you father and son? Friends? Did you have any questions, my friend, from Italy? Huh? Did you find what we were speaking about yesterday interesting?
Yes.
Because yesterday there was some resistance when I was speaking about the fact that the creation of the universe was one big, overwhelming yes! And so there was some resistance in some people who were listening to the fact that the creation of the universe could ultimately be an expression of unthinkable, unimaginable, inconceivable, overwhelming, radical, outrageous, non-dual positivity. Because if it's true, it's very good news. It means that to exist is good. Life is good. The existence of the universe is a good thing. Because if the existence of the universe isn't a good thing, then our existence is not a good thing either. If the existence of the universe is not a very good thing, then we have a problem. Because we are the universe incarnate. We're all the entire universe incarnate. We are all manifest expressions of the entire universe. So if the creation of the universe was and is pure positivity, that means that to exist is good, that the universe exists is good. And most importantly, for all of us confused postmodern adults who aren't so sure that life is good, we realize, no, it is good. Even if I'm having a bad day, maybe I'm depressed and angry and fearful and confused. But in spite of that, ultimately, the existence of manifest reality of the entire evolutionary process, the entire creative process, is good. So that's very important and very good news for us. Huh? A lot of very
Expression of love.
Excuse me?
We can say expression of love when we say good.
Well, I'd like to be a little audacious, then I would say yes, but not even more than that. Not I love you. I love you! It's different. Say, I love you. That's very sweet, but I'm talking about something more dynamic, more explosive, more absolute, more
life.
more explosive.
It depends on the situation.
Explosive, yes! Not,
in any situation you can express your love in this way.
well, I'm doing it. This is a situation. I'm trying to share this information with everybody. Yes! Because we're living in a very confusing time in history, right? That we're more educated, we're more wealthy, we have more freedom, access to information than human beings have ever had for the last 150,000 years. And yet we're lost, confused, miserable, full of doubt. Is life a good thing? Is it a good thing to exist? I'm not so sure. Are human beings good? I'm not so sure. Is life good? I'm not so sure. And then people come to Tiruvannamalai and then they hear people say, well, it never really happened. This isn't really happening. Really? They say this isn't really happening. And that creates more confusion. Maybe temporary relief, but I think it creates more existential confusion than anything else. If it's not really happening, what are you supposed to do? It doesn't answer if that's the question, that it's not really happening, it doesn't answer the question of what are we supposed to do, because the problem is every morning when you wake up and every morning when I wake up, we've got to deal with the question of what am I going to do? Should I brush my teeth? I don't feel like it. Should I stay in bed? I don't know. Should I have breakfast? I don't know. Should I take a bath? Should I take a bath? I don't know. It's a mess. So I think, and this is just me, so take it or leave it, unless we become convinced that not only to exist is purely positive, even if some of it's painful, unless we become philosophically, existentially, metaphysically, and experientially convinced that life is good, we're going to not be sure. Should I brush my teeth? I don't know if I should brush my teeth. There's no shoulds. There's just is. So in the context of just is and no shoulds, should I brush my teeth? And then we get into kind of Advaita madness. Should I brush my teeth? In an is context, it's not clear. Who is there to do the brushing? And who cares whether the teeth get brushed anyway? Does God care if you brush your teeth? I'm having fun, but I'm trying to make a serious point. So I have found, and I still very much believe, contrary to what a lot of people down here say, that I think that without the discovery and the recognition of an absolute purpose, without the discovery of absolute purpose, we're going to be lost. What should we do today? I don't know. What do you feel like doing? I don't know. Let's go to the beach. I don't want to go to the beach. Let's go on the mountain. I don't feel like it. So kind of, if life is one big toss-up, then it puts us in a very unwholesome, unpredictable, and dangerous place. So from my perspective, the whole point of waking up spiritually, metaphysically, existentially, is the recognition, the experiential recognition of an absolute, unequivocal purpose in existence. So if we have the good fortune to discover and to wake up to absolute purpose, then when we wake up in the morning, we have an obligation. And obligations keep us out of trouble. Have you noticed that? Everybody? Have you noticed that an obligation keeps you out of trouble? No? It keeps me out of trouble. Because like my obligation today was, I have to show up at 9:30 and I have to look good and I have to sound good and I have to be good. Right? That's my obligation. So that forces me to be a good boy. I mean, I want to be a good boy, but it forces me to do it. So for a human being to feel an obligation to show up at our best every day is a great gift from God, right? Absolute purpose. So postmodernism, which is the most recent wave of cultural evolution that came online when some of us are old enough to remember the 1960s. So some of us are getting old here, so we were there. But the last stage of cultural evolution was in the 1960s, and it was called postmodernism. And part of postmodernism was the emergence of the unique individual. My parents' generation, which was the Second World War generation, didn't need to see themselves as being unique individuals. They saw themselves as being a good mother, a good father. My father was a lawyer. So his identity, the identity of the culture before postmodernism in most adults was to embody a certain role, right? To embody a role. In India, if you meet a lot of Indian people, middle-class Indians, upper middle-class Indians, they're very much identified with their roles of being a mother, of being a father, of being a this or that. But the postmodern revolution gave rise to a new consciousness and a higher consciousness, which was I'm a unique individual. I'm a unique individual. Did you know that? I'm a unique individual. And we all wanted to be unique individuals. It's not easy to be a unique individual because everybody's following everybody else. So it's hard to be a unique individual. But nevertheless, in this new wave of cultural evolution, the feeling was, I'm a unique individual. I do whatever I want to do whenever I want to do it, and nobody tells me what to do. Follow? I'm a unique individual. Nobody tells me what to do. I get to do whatever I want to do whenever I want to do it because I'm a unique individual. In my father's generation, it was World War II. So most people went to fight the Nazis. Most people didn't think if there was a question, it was the war, your country's a war, you go fight it. In my generation, there was a Vietnam War. People said, hell no, I won't go. So that's all very good from one point of view. But the problem is being a unique individual. If we are identified with being a unique individual, if we're identified with being a unique individual, in whom, namaste, that was quick. If we're identified with being a unique individual, and when nobody tells me what to do, because I do what I want whenever I want to do it, and you mix that up with with spiritual philosophy, we end up in a place that's very lost because we don't know what to do. The spiritual philosophy, if it's powerful, will reveal to us that we are eternal, but we won't know what to do with our eternal nature. If God exists, do you think she wants us to do nothing or to do something? What do you think? God wants us to do something. Anybody else? Does anybody agree? If God exists, does God want us to do not? Just God say, "I love you." If you want to do nothing, I love you just as much as if you do something. But I would prefer if you do something. It's like a grandparent. So if God exists and God is love, does God want us to do? Would prefer that we do something or to do nothing? Anybody else have an idea about it? Huh?
To do something.
Have an obligation.
So God doesn't care? You're outnumbered. That doesn't mean you're wrong. Why do you think God doesn't care?
Because you don't have to do something to make God or whatever love you.
No. I wasn't talking about trying to please God. The question was, if God exists, would she prefer that you do something versus nothing? Let's have a playful imagination here. If God is, this is just playful imagination, so what I'm saying isn't really true. But in the context of playful imagination, let's say God is the mother or the father, the creator of the universe. The creator of the universe. So if you were God and you created the universe, and you created a universe that would give rise to life and to complex consciousness, wouldn't you see human beings as your children? You created them. No? Would you?
I mean, if you look at it like that, then yes.
Okay, very good. I said this is just speculative imagination.
Yeah.
I said does not really exist this way.
Yeah.
But sometimes in order to try and understand reality more deeply, we have to use our imagination. So if you created the universe, and when you created the universe, if you created the universe in which these complex life forms would appear. Hello, good morning, how are you? You'd care about them, wouldn't you? Because they're your children.
Yeah. From that perspective.
From that perspective, they're your children, right? And so from that perspective, would you want them to you'd want them probably to realize who you are, which is what spiritual awakening is. You'd want them to realize who you are, right? Because you love them. A parent loves a child. So you'd want them to realize who you are. So the spiritual awakening is that kind of realization. I realize who I am, right? Right? The realization of who, that's what we were talking about earlier. The realization of who I am, correct? But once you realize who you were, then you'd realize, well, from God's point of view, you're his or her children on earth are his hands and feet. Because God, in the absolute sense, doesn't have form, right? Right? In the absolute sense, God is formless. But the formless God created the whole universe of form. From formlessness came form, correct? And part of the form that came from formlessness is life. And as life evolves, life's capacity for conscious intelligence develops, right? There's the difference between lower forms of life and higher forms of life. So higher forms of life have more interiority, have more consciousness, and have more conscious intelligence. Correct? And life at the highest levels on this planet is human life.
That's debatable.
You mean like porpoises are more intelligent than we are?
Not God intelligence, but if you think of like God realization or what you want to call it, you could argue that some animals are just already in it, and we have to struggle to find it.
You mean like dogs?
For example, if you look at it like that.
Well, let me tell you a Zen story, which is very interesting about dogs. So in Zen, consciousness is called Buddha nature. In Zen, consciousness is called Buddha nature. So the Zen master asked the student, does a dog have Buddha nature? Which means, does a dog have consciousness? What's the answer to the question? Yes, correct. So the answer to the question is, does a dog have Buddha nature? The answer is yes. Second question is, can a dog become enlightened? The answer is no. And the reason why is because enlightenment, in line with what I was describing to you earlier, is when consciousness awakens to itself. When consciousness awakens to itself or becomes aware of it, becomes self-aware, that is a moment of enlightenment.
Dogs can be self-aware though. Do you mean
no. What I'm saying is, enlightenment is when consciousness awakens to itself and becomes self-aware. And that means human beings have the unique capacity to be aware of awareness. You can be aware of awareness. You did it immediately when we were talking. I asked you to put your attention on your experience of consciousness, and you did so effortlessly. A dog can't do that. A dog's aware of a ball flying by, or of a nice person sticking out their hand for it to be kissed. But a dog doesn't have the capacity to be aware of awareness.
We can't prove that though, because we can't speak to dogs. So
Well,
that's also just something we're assuming.
Well, we don't have to do anything, but there seems to be a collective agreement, and again, there could be exceptions. But generally speaking, human beings are we're the only ones that our consciousness is complex enough to be able to objectify awareness. So dogs are aware of the objects that arise in awareness, bones and toys and people and other dogs. But to be aware of awareness is quite a complex capacity in consciousness that it seems that other sentient beings don't have the capacity to do in the ways that human beings do. That seems, yeah. So, getting back to our discussion about the nature of God. So, if you were the creator of the universe, and you created this evolutionary process that gave rise to life and these complex creatures called human beings, imagine how lonely you would be, because in this miraculous universe you'd created, there were planets and star systems, but the planet and the star system doesn't have the capacity at the level of interiority to recognize you, to see you. And then out of these planets and star systems, simple forms of life are created. But the simple forms of life, single cells, and even multiple cell creatures, they can't see you because they don't have the complex cognition that makes it possible for them to see you. And then more time goes by, took about 14 billion years. And suddenly, human beings with this very sophisticated neocortex, which is the last layer of the brain, gave rise to life forms that have the capacity to cognize consciousness, to become aware of consciousness. And only human beings have the capacity to become aware of what we call God, or this absolute principle. So this would be the first time in 14 billion years that you, the creator, would have the experience of being seen, recognized, and loved by your creation. This is just a metaphysical play. So don't worry about it, whether it's absolutely true or not. I'm just trying to help us to feel into something. So when your creation, when the leading edge of what you created, which is human beings, gain this capacity level of consciousness to realize you, to awaken you to who you are, to become aware of you, you suddenly could feel you were being seen by your children. And this would have a dramatic effect on you, obviously.
If you needed to be seen. Yeah.
Sure. Well, what I'm doing for this exercise is I'm anthropomorphizing, which means humanizing an absolute principle to try and understand something that's difficult to understand. So yes. So, because this whole discussion is around this question about a human being's relationship to existence and action versus no action. That's the whole context. Remember? So so historically and generally speaking, what happens when people wake up is the first part of waking up is the realization that I'm not the small self, the self that was born in a particular period, a particular place and time. I'm not a particular body and a particular mind and a particular personality. At the deepest level, I've never been born and I never entered the stream of time, and I'm always free. So that's the realization of the ultimate nature of God as immortality. But then it becomes apparent to us that immortal being that doesn't exist in time and space created time and space. That immortal being that doesn't exist in time and space created time and space and is ultimately not separate from time and space. Time and space is all God. So from that perspective, what we see happens in the Enlightenment traditions is that the first part of the path is when we're seeking for relief from our own ego. We're seeking for relief from being trapped in a personal identity. Because being trapped in a personal identity is an experience of suffering, right? When consciousness is trapped in a personal identity, it experiences suffering and torment. And when it's released from the narrow confines of identification with a single personality, it experiences relief. It's an experience of being released. That's what Eckhart Tolle is describing in that book. I am released, right? Right? I'm released. But the second part of waking up is the realization that I'm not separate from the energy and intelligence that created the universe. I'm not separate from the energy and intelligence that created the universe. I am the energy and intelligence that created the universe, awakening to itself, becoming conscious and aware of itself through the vehicle of this body, this mind, and this personality. I am the creator. And this body, this mind, and this personality is only a vehicle for that creative energy and intelligence. So then the ego is displaced. The small personality is radically displaced. Because then I realize who I am. I am the energy and intelligence that created the universe and is creating it right now, becoming conscious of itself and self-aware of itself through the vehicle of this body, this mind, and this personality. So then you realize that this body, this mind, and this personality is a vehicle. It's not you. It's like a car or a plane. And that's the huge shift. It's a vehicle for this divine energy and intelligence. It's a vehicle. It's not who I am. And so then when you realize this at the level of experience and recognition, what comes with it is a sense of overwhelming purpose. Because then you realize, oh, that means this life is precious. And why is this life precious? Not because, what's your name? Not because Maya exists, and not because Andrew exists, but because when I exist with this awareness, when I exist in the context of with this kind of awareness, I can. There's so much I can do to help the Creator create the world that he and she gave rise to, which is not separate from who I am anyway. I am, Maya is, and Andrew is the energy and intelligence that created the universe and is creating the universe right now, awakening to itself through the body, mind, and personality of Maya and Andrew. So that's a completely different identity. It's a completely different identity than Andrew's identity with all his ego problems and his personal problems, and Maya's identity with her ego problems and her personal problems. Now I have a cosmic identity. And that cosmic identity experiences a sense of absolute purpose and purposefulness. Not relative purpose, absolute purpose. Absolute purpose is, because for example, if you were God, remember this is part of the speculative, imaginative exercise. If you were God, your nature would be fearless, doubtless, and absolute. So when God makes a decision, she doesn't wonder, did I do the right thing? Is this the right thing or the wrong thing? When she makes a decision, it's done. And there's no doubt, there's no fear, there's no question. It's an absolute action where there's no second thought, without any fear and without any doubt. There's complete commitment, absolute non-duality, only pure action. So that kind of consciousness, which is the second step in the awakening. The first is the awakening is to discover the inherent freedom of consciousness itself, which is what we were speaking about earlier. But the second step is the discovery of your true identity as the creative intelligence that gave rise to the whole process. And when you do, when one does, one feels overwhelmed with a sense of purposefulness, because this is yours. You created it. And as I like to repeat every day in India, Vedanta tells us that the ultimate truth is that there's only one and not two. You've heard that, right? Vedanta keeps repeating the ultimate truth is that there's only one and not two, right? Really? Wow. Well, you will. So Vedanta. It's the essence of Indian metaphysics, of Eastern metaphysics. That there's the ultimate truth is that there's one self in the universe. It's one self. There's one I in the whole universe, not two. I am that. You've heard of that. I am that. I am that one without a second. That in the entire universe there's only one self, one without a second. I am that. So Vedanta proclaims that there's only one and not two. That's the ultimate truth. There's only one. And then the revelation is, I am that one without a second. So when Maya wakes up and she realizes, I am the only one that exists, which can be a form of madness or an expression of enlightenment. So the master here, so Ramana had a profound realization of the fact that he was that one without a second. That's why everybody was loving him, because they were loving him because he was a reflection of their own self. When someone has a powerful realization of this truth, this Vedantic truth, they start vibrating at a level of content. They start vibrating and transmitting this truth of Vedanta, that there's only one, but the self begins to transmit it as a vibration, begins to be shared. So the book, The Power of Now, transmits that at a level of vibration. The same truth, there's only one. But what's very profound is when we have the courage to take the truth of Vedanta very seriously, which is, if I am the only one that there is, not as an ego, not as a body, but true self, if I am the only one that there is, then it means in a way that's impossible to understand intellectually that I am the only one that could have been, not the ego. Remember, not the ego, not the small personality, but I'm the only one that could have been to give rise to all of this. Could anybody else have done it except you if you're the only one that exists? No. The intellect can't get it. The ego and the mind, they just go, you've got to be crazy. This is ridiculous. But I'm not talking about the small self. I'm not talking about Maya. I'm talking about the I upon which Maya is superimposed. You get it? It's profound. And so then when we realize this, either Maya is, okay, I surrender. Or she says, I won't surrender. But this is for all of us. This is true for all of us, right? We're all in the same predicament. We're all in exactly the same predicament in terms of this metaphysical challenge. Right? We're all in exactly the same predicament. And the ego goes, I think this is bullshit. But the ego doesn't want it to be true because the ego wants to be the one who's in control. In control of what? In control of the vehicle. The vehicle's the body, the mind, and the personality. The body, the mind, and the personality is a vehicle. It's like a car. Right? The body is the body, the mind, and the personality who you really are? No. But it's a vehicle. So it's the car you're driving around in. Right? Some cars are in good shape, some cars are in bad shape. But then, whether the car's in the good shape or bad shape is not the most important question. Who's in the driver's seat of the car? So usually, the unenlightened, narcissistic ego is in the driver's seat. So with the moksha experience or the enlightenment experience, the ego gets out of the driver's seat and gets into the back seat. And so when the ego gets out of the driver's seat and gets into the back seat, and what I call the authentic self or the true self gets into the front seat, then the vehicle, which is the body, mind, and the personality, is now being driven by the authentic self or the true self, not the ego. And that's the whole point. And then your vehicle, which is your body, your mind, and your personality, will become an expression of higher consciousness, moksha, enlightenment. So you'll still have the name you had before. You'll still be called Maya, or I'll still be called Andrew. But you won't merely be Maya anymore, and I won't merely be Andrew. Because you'll be expressing the truth that there's only one self. And one self, the one self that we all are, the one self basks in its own reflection. So the great Nisargadatta Maharaj, which you might have heard of, he wrote the book I Am That, is always seeking, it's a miracle, but consciousness is always seeking for itself. I can't explain it, but I can only say it's true. Consciousness is always seeking for itself. Consciousness is always seeking for itself. Even if it's set up like this, consciousness is seeking for itself. My consciousness is seeking for your consciousness. Your consciousness is seeking for my consciousness. Our consciousness is seeking for itself. And when consciousness finds itself, it's happy. Fulfilled. Consciousness is always self-seeking. That's why for thousands of years people have been coming together in gatherings like this. 4,000 years ago, same thing. We could have been sitting in the same place with a group of people like this, hearing similar words, making the same point. And then everybody sits quietly. Because consciousness is seeking for itself. But the ego is not seeking for this. What does the ego want? Power.
Comfort.
Power, pleasure, security. Power, pleasure, and security. Mm-hmm. Mine, not yours. Right? But then consciousness is seeking for itself. Consciousness is always seeking for itself. Consciousness is seeking for inclusion, not exclusion. Can you feel it? Consciousness is seeking for itself, always in inclusion, not exclusion. Consciousness is like a fire that's burning, and it's looking for more wood. So the traditional metaphor is like we're all pieces of wood. And when we catch consciousness is like a fire, and when we catch fire, we start burning. And when you start burning with consciousness, consciousness starts speaking through you. Isn't that amazing? So who's in the driver's seat of your car? Remember, the body, the mind, and the personality is not you. It's a vehicle for consciousness, right? The body, the mind, and the personality is a vehicle for consciousness. It's not you. But the car has 4 seats in it, and who's in the driver's seat? Because who's ever in the driver's seat is going to be in control of your body, in control of your mind, and in control of your personality. If your true self, what I call the true self or the authentic self, is in the driver's seat, your body, your mind, and personality will be an expression, a manifestation, and an expression of enlightened awareness. When the body and the mind become an expression of enlightened awareness, that which is finite and relative begins to express that which is infinite and non-relative, and that's what's amazing. When that which is finite and relative begins to express and manifest that which is infinite and non-relative, that's enlightenment. And when that happens to you, you appear to be an ordinary person, but you're not an ordinary person anymore because you're rooted at the very source of creation. And if it's true, it's true. Can't fake it. So the point I'm trying to make is that there's relative purpose and absolute purpose. Relative purpose and absolute purpose. So many people say in Tiruvannamalai, there is no purpose. There just is. Understand? There's only is. There's no purpose. There's only is. This becomes nihilismo. Because a human being needs purpose to thrive. Capito? A human being without a sense of purpose starts to rot spiritually. It's just a fact of nature. Like a dog needs love, right? Human beings need purpose like we need food. Without purpose, we rot.
Basic need, absolutely basic.
Correct, sir. Correct. But then we come into a problem with postmodern nihilism, which is there is no purpose, and spiritual nihilism, which is Advaita madness. There is no purpose. It kills our soul. It's soul death, and it's a horrible problem. I had dinner with somebody last night who was telling me that somebody here he knew committed suicide in Tiru because of this crazy philosophy that teaches purposelessness and nihilism. So purposelessness is poison for the soul. Sure. I'll just really, absolutely sure. Good. Capito. So when we realize that purpose is essential for human fulfillment, it changes everything. Now the problem is that modern culture and postmodern culture tell us that we'll experience fulfillment through having a happy family, having children, having money, having houses, having power. And then when we realize that having money and having children, having houses and having power won't give us fulfillment, we start seeking for deeper fulfillment, spiritual fulfillment, not just material fulfillment, biological, sexual fulfillment, or material fulfillment. We start looking for deeper fulfillment, and then we come to Tiru, and there's no purpose. Then it's like and it's not true anyway. People who, from my perspective, people who say that they don't know what they're talking about. Purposelessness makes us sick. Yes, what did you want to ask?
So, I feel my experience that okay, we need a purpose.
They all want to hear you.
I feel my experience that we need a purpose, of course, to deserve this life. But there is some point that we reach that there is no purpose.
But I can explain why we get to that point. You want me to explain it to you? Or are you finished? Keep going. There's more. Is there more?
Yeah. So at the same time, I agree that we need a purpose, but if you go deeper, deeper, and deeper, you feel okay. Life just is, So there is no purpose. You just learn how to live from a different place. I understand what I mean. Just
Huh?
I think it's something more profound that I cannot describe in words, but I want to share now.
Okay, so let me try and help you. So before the universe existed, was there purpose? I said before the universe existed. Before the universe existed. Why?
Why?
Yeah. Because nothing existed. So when nothing exists, there can't be any purpose. Everybody follow? Before the universe existed, there was no purpose, because there can't be any purpose when nothing exists. Right? But what's very interesting about when the universe came into being, that whole picture changed. Because the discovery of evolution has changed this whole metaphysic. Because if we look at the creative process that came from nothingness, first there was light. Light emerged from nothingness, from darkness. Light gave rise to energy and matter. Energy and matter created the conditions that made it possible for life to emerge. And from life emerged mind. So if you step back, you go from nothing to light, to energy and matter, to life, and to mind. And you stand back, you see there's a developmental trajectory. So it seems that the creative process, if we stand back far enough, is on a 14 billion year journey. It's on a 14 billion year creative journey. It's on a journey of becoming more complex. And as the creative process becomes more complex, It become the inside of that process is consciousness or subjectivity or interiority or the capacity for creative intelligence. So the whole creative process is becoming more and more conscious of itself. And with the emergence of human beings, this process, as I was saying earlier, this process is becoming infinitely more conscious of itself than it's ever been throughout this 14 billion year developmental process. So the evolutionary perspective makes it clear that this creative process is going somewhere, is reaching for higher potentials, and is going somewhere. The universe is going somewhere. And that's what changes everything. So the universe is reaching towards conscious intelligence. And with the emergence of conscious intelligence in the universe can become conscious of its source. And that's what a gathering like this is fundamentally all about. Is that we've all been produced by this creative process. We are products of this creative process. And we have the capacity at the level of consciousness and conscious intelligence to become self-aware of our own source. And when we become self-aware of our own source, the whole universe becomes aware of its own source. So that means the universe is literally becoming conscious through us, as us. And when any human being becomes conscious of his or her source, their whole being becomes illuminated and pregnant with spiritual power and purposefulness. It means something to exist. It doesn't mean nothing. Because life and the whole creative process is going in a direction. Who created that direction? It could only be Spirit itself, or God, or the Absolute Principle. So the Absolute Principle, through the creative process, is reaching through us, as us, for greater and greater potential. And we experience that as love. But it's not a passive love, it's an active love that cares desperately about what happens here. And that's God, or the Absolute Principle, caring through us. Because God can only express that care through us. That God can't express that care through a consciousness of a rock, or a snake, or a butterfly, or a bee, or even a flower. Because those life forms don't have the developmental complexity enough to be able to cognize and experience that kind of care, but we do. And when you meet deeply awake people who are deeply awake to these metaphysical absolute truths, you begin to find a level of care that's not ordinary. It's a non-ordinary higher expression of care. So, for example, when I met my guru, he cared about consciousness in a way that I could not understand at the time. He cared more than I did about my consciousness. The way I'm sure a lot of you can feel I care more about your consciousness than you do. But where does the care come from? It doesn't come from me. It comes from consciousness itself. But my point to you is that the universe is on a journey of becoming. It's on a journey of becoming. And there's a simple phrase which is very powerful. To prove that the universe is on a journey of becoming, he said, you take hydrogen gas, leave it alone for 14 billion years, and you'll produce Shakespeare. How did nothing but hydrogen gas turn into Shakespeare? The universe is reaching, is becoming. And so when we awaken to that consciousness, the consciousness of evolution ourselves, when we awaken to to evolution as an experience in consciousness, that direction, that reaching, that becoming, we begin to become aware of it. We feel it. And that's when we awaken to a sense of great care and great purpose. But it's not personal care, it's God's care, God as the creator. And we begin to feel that sense of purpose. And that purpose is powerful. So then when we wake up, we say, yeah, damn well, I'm going to brush my teeth. And I'm going to take care of myself because I need to be beautiful. Because I want people to respect consciousness. If I don't respect myself, then no one's going to respect the consciousness that they are. Have a good morning. You follow? So if we're sleeping in our ego, we don't know all this. We're like, but when you wake up, we begin to feel these things. We feel these things ourselves. We see these things. Different kinds of thoughts come into our mind about creation, about creativity, about evolution. And when you think about evolution and creativity and you feel it, you wake up. You become alive and you become inspired to live this human life in the most extraordinary way possible. That's what God wants you to do, wants me to do. But if we don't care, if we get infected with this disease of purposelessness and meaninglessness, we won't develop. Hello, good morning. Hello. Come. You can sit.
I think that's.
Come. You can walk here this way. It's fine. Come. Fine. Namaste. You follow?
Yes, I think that's what I want to say actually, because when there's a point that you realize that everything is sacred, everything is divine, and you start doing things from this place within, for God, not for the world.
Correct.
So I don't understand why you put this in one hand and the Vedantas.
It's two halves of one piece. It's two parts of one whole picture. Being, one is being, the other is becoming. The sum total of reality is everything that exists and everything that doesn't exist. Right? The sum total of everything that exists and everything that doesn't exist is everything. It's from the highest point of view, it's the same, but we can also say half is being, half is becoming. One side is being, the other side is becoming. They're both the same, true. From an absolute point of view, they're the same, but from a relative point of view, they're actually very different.
What do you mean by relative point of view?
Because from the absolute highest perspective, there's no distinction between one thing or another. From an absolute point of view, what's your name again?
Mirella.
So from an absolute point of view, Mirella and Andrew disappear. Mirella, Andrew, and the computer all disappear. There's no distinction between Andrew, Mirella, and the computer, and VJ, and the rug, and this. It's gone. It's all one. But then when you step down a little bit from this absolute position, you begin to see, a young woman from Brazil, man from living in Bangalore, VJ, I'm American, there's the computer. You begin to see these distinctions appeared. And the distinctions are also God. The distinctions are God in the form of manifestation. So we can't function in this world unless we honor these distinctions. If we don't honor the distinctions that exist in reality, we can't live in a way that makes sense. If I pretend there's no difference between you and difference between me, we can't function in the real world. So the more I'm able to appreciate the actual distinctions that exist between us, we can actually have a real relationship. And the more authenticity there is in our relationship, the more honesty, the deeper the relationship can actually be. Right? But anyway, just a simple answer to your question is if you look at all of reality as being one, all of reality is one. And you say on one half there's being, isness, what you're talking about. Being is isness, nowness, nothingness, emptiness. That's one half. And the other half of the picture is becoming. The whole universe is in a state of becoming. It's all of nature. The whole cosmos and nature are all in a state of growing, becoming, and complexifying. And what's so extraordinary about evolution is a process of infinite complexification. So the universe is becoming more complex. And in the complexification of the universe is becoming more intelligent, becoming more self-aware. So the question is, when we see that the universe is reaching towards higher intelligence, the universe is reaching creating the conditions in which and through which it can become more conscious, how can you say God isn't doing all that? God is the only one who could design that process. So the universe is reaching towards greater complexity. It objectively is. So if we just say being is the only truth and becoming doesn't exist, we're denying half of the truth of reality. We're living out of alignment with reality. And because we're human, you're a human being and I'm a human being, the fact that the universe is reaching through us is very important information for us. If the universe is is trying to reach through us, so it can give rise to its own potentials through us, that's very important information. So the ego doesn't hear it because the ego has its own agenda. The ego has, based on your personal life and my personal life. So the ego can't hear the message of God. But when the ego gets quiet, we can begin to hear this deeper knowledge. We begin to hear it. It's like, wait, it's, oh, wow, really? And then we change because we hear the deeper truth. You follow? But the universe is reaching through us. It's amazing, and it feels good, babies. It feels good. It's creativity is pure positivity. That's what I was saying yesterday. It's pure positivity. The ego says, "Oh no, I can't do it." Right? I can't do it. I'm not good enough. Right?
So, as far as I understand, you're saying that we are searching for a purpose for the ego, right?
No,
Consciousness already knows, already is. But the ego is in the process of becoming, right?
no, the ego has a different agenda than the consciousness. Have you heard of Sri Aurobindo? So Sri Aurobindo came up with an interesting term. He called it the psychic being. The psychic being. So when as you can see, I'm sure you've met people here, when a human being starts to seek for consciousness, we begin to feel different feelings. When you're starting to seek for the ultimate mystery beyond life and death, you begin to feel certain feelings, like when you read The Power of Now or you read I Am That. You begin to feel certain feelings that are non-ordinary feelings. They're spiritual feelings. So the true seeker awakens to what Sri Aurobindo calls the psychic being, and the psychic being is an inner momentum. It's like a train that's moving. It's an inner momentum, and that train is on a journey towards higher consciousness. So the psychic being is momentum or movement at the level of consciousness. It's reaching towards higher complexity. And when as a true seeker, when you're meditating deeply, coming to hear talks like this, reading, and reaching for depth, you awaken to the psychic being, because the psychic being is that movement or is that momentum itself. And when you become conscious of the psychic being, you start to become a lot more conscious. You start to feel a lot of depth that the ego is not capable of feeling. So the depth that the psychic being is an expression of is not what the ego is searching for. The ego is searching for power, comfort, security, and pleasure. And the psychic being is reaching for knowledge and truth. And the psychic being is a different part of you and a different part of me than the ego. It's not the same. So when we awaken to the psychic being, we experience sobriety, depth, sincerity, authenticity. And we experience a different part of ourselves.
Yeah, so what's the...
Speak up louder.
What do you do with the ego? Because it's there, no?
What do you do with it?
Yeah, it's there.
You break up. It's like a bad relationship. You break up.
What do you mean?
Well, Namaste, good morning. What happens when you're in a bad relationship? What do you do? When you're in a bad relationship, you say, this relationship is really bad. What do you do? You don't have to sit on the floor. You can come sit here. As you wish. When you're in a bad relationship, what do you do?
Okay, we break up. So what's the goal?
So just a minute. Let's go. So if you're in a bad relationship, you break up. I don't love you anymore. Right? And then if it's your boyfriend, it's please, I love it. So I'm sorry, it's over. Please, 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 don't leave me. Please don't. Say it's over. And then you walk away. Because the ego is not just a personal identity, it's a whole agenda. You follow what, you know what agenda is? Yes. So the ego is a whole program, it's a whole agenda. So when it's like breaking up with your boyfriend, when you're with your boyfriend, oh my God, I had to live according to his craziness. I don't want to have anything to do with that anymore. I want to be free. So the ego is a whole agenda, it's a whole worldview, it's a whole huge perspective. So walking away from that is walking away from the whole agenda of the ego. You follow? The ego is not just a feeling, it's a whole program.
Yeah, but is there a point that it disappears?
What?
Is there a point in the journey that the ego disappears? Or
Well, it might disappear, but let's be more humble. Let's say there's a point when it becomes not so important. Because it's good to be realistic. So if someone tells you their ego is completely dead, don't believe them because they're probably lying. That's 35 years experience talking to you. Don't believe it. That's probably never happens. If it ever happens, it's a freak. The exception doesn't make the rule. But the ego can become smaller. That's very possible. For all of us, we can do that. So what you do is you make the agenda of the true self, the agenda of the authentic self, the agenda of the psychic being, we make that number one. And the agenda of the ego or the small self, number two. That's enough to change everything. But if you try and destroy your ego completely, it's like you're doomed to fail. I have a teaching called Evolutionary Enlightenment. It's called Evolutionary Enlightenment. So how I help people to make this shift is I encourage everybody to put moksha or enlightenment or evolutionary enlightenment first. What's the most important thing for you? Well, I don't know. So, but if we become sure that to become a liberated person, an enlightened person, an awake person, an intelligent person, a sensitive person, a caring person, if that's more important to us than anything else, then we make it first. It's being clear about our intention in relationship to this life. So I say, what are you doing here? What is your purpose? I want to be free. Or if you say, I want to have a good job. I want to make a lot of money. I want to have lots of girlfriends. I want to be able to be free to travel where I want to go when I want to do it. I want to be able to have anything I want whenever I want to have it. That's what I want. That's not what I'm talking about. So if you say, I want to be free more than anything else, freedom is related to what I was speaking with Maya about in relationship to zero. Remember zero? I want to be free. Capital F, free, capital F, capital R, capital E, capital E. I want to be free first. More than I want money, more than I want sex, more than I want power, more than I want comfort. More than I want anything, more than any relationship, I want to be free first. Then everything comes second. Everything else is secondary. The priority is my quest for liberation in this life, by the way. And that's how we create a new kind of order, a new kind of structure in our life.
That's what you call purpose.
That's a big purpose.
Okay.
That's a big purpose. I came to India in 1984. Before I used to live in New York. And people in New York say, what do you do? What do you do? What do you do, you know? New Yorkers are very quick. What do you do? And I got to a point where all I wanted to do was become an enlightened person. And people say, "What do you do?" I said, "Well, I'm doing this, but what I really want is liberation." And people go, "Uh-huh." So then I came to India in 1984, and then I did a meditation retreat. And at the end of the retreat, I was sitting in a tea shop, and I realized I'm not going home. And the reason I knew I was never going to go home is because India's got a lot of problems. So I don't think India is any perfect place by any stretch of the imagination. But India gave me permission. In India, you can say, "I'm seeking for moksha," and people will go, "Wow, really?" I'll go, "Wow." So India gave me permission. So I said, "I'm not going home. And I'm not going to go back until I find what I'm looking for." So I was completely dedicated. I was completely one-pointed. So I find when people come to India, when they go to Rishikesh or they come to Tiruvannamalai or they go to Bodh Gaya, temporarily, for most people, they start thinking about moksha. For maybe a few days or a few weeks or a few months, people start taking moksha as they start thinking about it a little bit more, or reading I Am That, or reading The Power of Now. But then people forget, they go back or they go to the beach. I would meet people on a meditation retreat in India, and afterwards we would be having these really profound discussions about meditation and about enlightenment. And then I would meet them 2 weeks later on the beach somewhere, some Indian beach, and they were in a new relationship. They were drinking alcohol again. They were smoking dope every day. "Hi, man." I said, "Hi." It was all gone. Don't you remember those amazing conversations? Anyway, they dropped it. Because this is very subtle what we're talking about. It's very profound, and most people don't think about these things very often. So when you start to wake up, even to the fact of the level of awakeness that you're all in right now is meaningful because you're connected. So the reason why we have to cultivate a strong intention is so we remain connected all the time. And in my way of understanding, the only way to stay connected, because we can't stay connected all the time at level of feeling, but we can stay connected all the time at level of intention. So you can intend to become more conscious all the time. It doesn't mean you're going to be more conscious all the time, but your intention to be more conscious will keep you awake. Because life will always say, "Well, would you like to do this, or would you like to do that? Would you like coffee or tea or lassi or a shake or whatever?" Life is giving us all these opportunities to do anything else and everything else except this. You follow? So the way to stay awake is to intend to stay awake as a life priority. And if you intend to stay awake as a life priority, you create the conditions that make it possible to stay awake. And you avoid conditions that make it difficult. See? Make sense? Good. Am I making sense? So this is a very simple teaching, but it's very important. It's called "I want to be free more than anything else." Everybody says, I said, "Do you want to be free?" Everybody said, "Of course I want to be free." Then they say, "Do you want to be free more than anything else?" And people say, "I'm not sure if I want to be free more than anything else. I want to be free more than anything else. I'm not so sure." So if you cultivate wanting to be free more than anything else, you'll succeed. Yes, sir. Where are you from? That's okay. I'm curious. Where are you from? Which country? Where did you used to be from before you forgot?
Cosmopolitan. Let me make the shift to this new ideas. I like to fly ahead, new age. I don't know why. That was interesting. So, I belong to the state-wise.
I'm sorry, sir. I can't tell.
State-wise, like a state, like a nationality state.
Yes, yeah. Yeah.
Originally, I'm from Eastern Europe.
Thank you. Grazie. Merci.
Okay, question.
Yeah. Simple is always the best.
And that people understand what you're saying, understand sharpest. You say like the most important thing to know or want is to want to be great. And then it seems that like they know that invest time and energy in these things. And when it comes to wanting to be free, desire, and have to understand the prison, big ends, and emotional problems, or minds, or surroundings, then somehow it's like, it's not how we see how one can be free. Sometimes you still have to endure yourself, as you are. Can you explain more about this?
I have found that if we want to be free more than anything else, we will consistently make choices that will continually make us step in that direction. Because every day we have a choice. I could do this, I could do that. And there are big choices and little choices. But if we want to be free more than anything else, we tend to make all the big choices that keep us going in the right direction. Also, as I think you're pointing out, there are conscious and unconscious forces within us. Some of us which we're not conscious of that are pulling us in the opposite direction. And I think the only way to have victory over those unconscious forces that may be pulling us in the opposite direction is to become as unified as we're capable of being behind this goal of wanting to be free more than anything else. 35 years ago when I started teaching, one of the people who was coming to me had been a seeker for a lot longer than I had. And for part of that time, for many years, had been a Buddhist monk in Thailand, which is a very serious thing to do, no? So he came to me and he was very confused. He wasn't a monk anymore. I said, have you ever thought about wanting to be free more than anything else? He said, I never thought about that. And I remember when I went, wow, okay, well, and it really helped him. So all I'm saying is, choices create karma, no? The choices we make from one moment to another create karma. We create our own destiny by the choices that we make one moment to another. So should I go to Delhi or should I go to Madras? So what you can say, what does going to Delhi or going to Madras have to do with my deepest intention of wanting to be free more than anything else? If going to Delhi is more in alignment for whatever reason with my wanting to be free more than anything else, I'm definitely going to go to Delhi and not to go to Madras. Should I get into this new relationship or should I not get into this new relationship? Will getting into this relationship strengthen my desire for liberation? Will it support it? Or will it inevitably become a distraction and pull me away? I'm going to avoid it. Should I? And so we can begin to apply this fundamental existential position in relationship to all the important choices that we make. And because if we believe that we want to be free more than anything else, then we have to act on that belief. We have to act on that belief, and the acting on that belief creates this momentum of the psychic being. It starts moving faster. It starts getting stronger, and we become a spiritual force. It's a force that's going in this one direction. It won't be distracted left or right. And when someone feels that kind of conviction, you feel it. It's like, for example, when the Buddha said, I'm going to sit down under this tree and I'm not getting up until I'm enlightened. That's exactly what I'm talking about. He didn't get enlightened because he was watching the breath at the tip of his nose. It wasn't Vipassana that liberated him. It was the power of his intention. Or, for example, the case of Paramahansa Yogananda, who influenced so many of us. He was practicing Kriya Yoga, but it wasn't the Kriya Yoga that liberated him. It was the power of his unique power of his intention, his passion. So there's no particular technique that's going to save us, and it's no particular path in and of itself. It's our relationship to the path. And I believe if we're truly serious, we have to get to that point that we become doubtless about the outcome. We don't know when it's going to happen. We don't know where it's going to happen. And we're not even necessarily sure how it's going to happen, but we are sure that it's going to happen. And the reason we're sure it's going to happen is because we're not going to allow it not to happen. That's what I'm talking about. And most people, my friend, don't feel that way. They feel, I would like it to happen, but I can't really imagining it happening to me. Who am I? I'm nobody. I'm not a special person. And people entertain a lot of ambivalence, conscious and unconscious ambivalence about whether it's possible for them, whether it even really exists. There's so much understandable ambivalence and confusion, hesitation, and that will keep us in this middle ground for too much of the time. But if we're sure, it means we have to be willing to take ourselves very seriously not our ego, but to take our true self very seriously for the right reasons. And this involves a lot of self-respect, deep self-respect, not for the ego, but for the true self, deep self-respect and sincerity. So if you're sincere, it means you don't go off the path. If we were sincere and I met you in a year, you would be as intense and as focused as you are now. You wouldn't have. Yeah, I know that's what I was saying there, but I met somebody and one thing led to another, and here we are. But he said, I thought you really cared. He said, yeah, I do, but Okay. It really works. It doesn't make it easy because it's hard. It doesn't make it easy, but it really works. Keep it simple. Keep it simple. So how are we doing? How are we doing for time? What time is it?
Can I ask you a question?
Absolutely, you can. I just want to find out what time it is. What? Okay, so we'll go for another 30 minutes and we finish. Yes.
Yeah, okay. You partly answered the question, but still, I want you to just see how I imagine the things.
Can everybody hear him?
Okay. So the Buddhists say that the main task of the human beings is to drop out from the wheel of samsara. And all the
wheel of becoming, the wheel of becoming.
Yeah, wheel of being, wheel of becoming. They're turning all the beings, the animals, the insects, and all sentient beings are in this wheel. And the higher power, there's nothing against. If someone wants to enjoy and remain there, you can stay there enjoying sex and money and power.
Oh my God, what a terrible thing to do.
But the point comes when some beings decide, the human beings, that is it all that life gives? And they find the teachers will say, no, there's something else. And the highest that you can get is this, you can get God, you can know yourself, you can go the highest,
right,
and everything. And some people start to this way to escape somehow from this wheel of samsara. And that's how the priorities will shift slowly from survival and pleasure and power and even love and creativity. It's like going up and up on chakras, as the Hindus say, chakras, and they come to this seventh chakra, it's liberation. And the priorities, it's like this. Of course, these kind of people, I can say of myself, I don't deny the comfort and the relationship and the traveling, but the list of priorities, the freedom is number one. The freedom or God or myself or just knowing what is the meaning, purpose, it's became the most inspiring.
So what's the question?
The question is, like, when it becomes, number one, but still there are so many. What changes? For me, I think that only what we can change when the big self gets at the wheel. What's changing is like the attitude that happens in life, because the circumstances of life and what happens, they will not change if the self gets on the wheel. I don't see it like this. Only the attitude.
Well, yes.
What changed in your case? Okay,
The
when the big self set at the wheel.
the motivation, the motivation to exist. The motivation to exist.
Yeah. My motivation.
No, that you said what changed.
Oh yeah,
The
motivation.
motivation to exist.
Intentional motivation.
You're asking me what changed. So
motivation.
So my motivation before was all about me. Now my motivation is about something much deeper than me. That's what changed. It's everything I've been speaking about. For most people, the motivation is always self-serving.
For you, motivation and intention are the same or not?
I think they're slightly different, but it could be similar.
Because my English is not native.
No, I understand. It's motivation. There's two spiritual fundamental questions. Who am I? Why am I here?
Yeah.
So whose life am I living? This is why in a lot of the dialogues I've been having, I've been trying to point out that when you wake up to what I call the authentic self, because in the teaching I make a distinction between true self, which is the consciousness of isness. Did you leave? So true self is consciousness of isness, timelessness, where we started this morning. Authentic self is the consciousness of the evolutionary impulse, creative impulse, the creator of the universe. Authentic true self is being. Authentic self is becoming. So when you wake up to the authentic self, you feel an evolutionary urgency. You start to feel like this is your creation. This is your creation, and you feel urgently and desperately about it. You care. It means you really, 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 really care. And what you're caring about is not yourself so much as human potential, as the potential in consciousness, that it becomes liberated. And then you see what's happened when people's potential gets liberated, they change, they become completely different people. Positive, creative, free, happy, grateful. Their presence makes the sun shine, the flowers bloom. You follow? And so you know what's possible, but you aren't trying to shake everybody up so they wake up to the same truth that you've woken up to. And then everything changes. You're seeing everything differently, you feel differently, and your motivation is completely different. You're not just out for yourself. You care about what God cares about, because that God force is awake in you and is expressing itself through you. And other people feel it. They feel it. And if you become really awake, your presence will wake people up.
From a material point of view, it expresses itself as well. Everything just becomes good. Everything seems to happen for the best all the time, even when you're just moving around. That just kind of falls into place.
On good days, that's true. But you get my point.
Yes.
And the point I was trying to make clear to when I was speaking to her before is that there's a motivation There's a motivation in the creative process. There's a motivation in the creative process. The creative process is going somewhere and complexifying and becoming more of what it can be. And that's purely positive. And when we wake up from our egos and feel that positivity, we start to bloom like a flower. When a human being starts blooming like a flower, it's a beautiful thing. We become beautiful expressions of spirit through this body, through this mind, through this personality. We're not just separate, depressed, lost individual souls, but we're awake. Because otherwise, as long as we allow ourselves not to be awake, we're kind of wasting time. What have you done for the last 10 years? I don't know. Has it been 10 years? It's been 10 years. What have you done? What have you done the last 20 years? I don't know. Survived. But is surviving it, is it enough? There's so much potential here. Because if we're successful, if we're victorious, God's victorious through us, as us. So it's win-win. Everybody wins. But if we give up on ourselves and we don't have the courage to stay with it, we live a mediocre life, and we live a life of compromise and mediocrity. The evolutionary impulse or the creative spirit in the universe can't realize itself, can't manifest itself through us, and the life loses out. What it could have happened didn't happen. Now, ultimately, it doesn't matter, but ultimately, it does matter. And the point is, even though this has not been my emphasis, that we as individuals discover happiness, source of happiness and joy, But it's a happiness and joy that's not personal, and that's why it's so important. It's not a personal joy. It's not the joy of the ego. It's spiritual joy, deep and abiding happiness. It's intoxicating. It's ecstasy. But the ecstasy is the result. It's not the goal. That's not the point. Is not to experience that. Ecstasy is the byproduct. When you're doing the right things for the right reasons and you're making the right choices for the right reasons, you start to feel good. And when it starts happening, when the things start coming together, and when there's an integration, this energy and this power, this energy and this intelligence starts speaking through you, walking through you, talking through you. And then you're living a different life. You're in a different state of consciousness. And the most important thing is you're having an effect on the world around you. Your presence in the world is having an effect, a positive effect. So when your presence in the world or our presence in the world has a positive effect, you are released from your karmic burden because it's like paying your rent. Huh? Don't we have an obligation simply because we're here to make the world a little bit of a better place? Or do we get just to consume food, consume energy, consume information? Is it okay for us just to be consumers? Because nobody cares, because God doesn't really exist and nothing matters? Yuck. Or do we have an obligation because we're alive to help God in her process? What do you think? Huh?
Yeah, I think we have an obligation.
But that's non-duality also. This is a different expression of non-duality. I am that also. I'm not just consciousness, disembodied consciousness. I'm also this creative expression of intelligence that works through physical form. I am that also. And the creative intelligence manifesting itself in and through physical form is not passive, it's active. Purposeful, not purposeless.